I'm just thrilled that we're all here together, joining together to call for the repeal of the AUMF. Ever since ICUJP was founded after 9/11, it has opposed the authorization for the use of military force. And we worked with and honored Barbara Lee, the sole member of Congress to oppose the original AUMF. And she has worked tirelessly to repeal the AUMF of 2001 and the subsequent Iraq AUMF of 2002. And so have other groups like the Friends Committee on National Legislation. We're glad that this campaign has widespread support from Veterans for Peace, Military Families Speak Out, and U.S. Deported Veterans, all of whom showed up at the lobby visit we had with at Senator Badia's office. So this morning, I'd like to share with you some of the background of the IMF, where things stand today, and explore where we might go next. So I'm going to show a slideshow based on talking points from the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and I'll conclude with a video of Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who's called for the repeal of the AUMF and reforming the War Powers Act. And after that, well, there'll be time for open discussion. So let me share the screen. The good news is that support for repealing the AUMF is growing. Over the past 2 years, congressional support has grown, and organizations spanning varying ideologies and perspectives agree, including a transpartisan coalition of 25 groups and the Conservative Heritage Foundation, which said that the 2002 AUMF has run its course and should be repealed. In 2019, the House voted on a bipartisan basis to adopt Representative Barbara Lee's amendment to the Annual Defense Policy Bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, to repeal the 2002 Iraq AUMF. In 2020, the House twice voted to repeal this authorization, first as part of the January No War Against Iran Act, and second as the Annual Defense Spending Bill in July. So, let's see. Currently, Barbara Lee's bill to repeal the 2002 Iraq IUMF, HR 256, has 112 bipartisan co-sponsors. In the Senate, SJ 10 from Senators Tim Kaine and Todd Young, which would repeal both the 2002 Iraq AUMF and the 1991 Gulf War AUMF, has 13 bipartisan co-sponsors. And some of you may have seen Senator Tammy Duckworth on the Stephen Colbert Show calling for repeal of the AUMF. So this is becoming an increasingly popular idea. So what is the AUMF and how is it different from a declaration of war? While declarations of war authorize total war, providing the president with the entire and unqualified use of the US military, AUMFs authorize a more limited use of force. The last declaration of war was passed in 1942 against Romania during World War II. Since that time, the wars in Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, and Iraq have all been authorized by AUMFs. What is the 2002 Iraq AUMF? Congress passed the 2002 Iraq AUMF to authorize the war against Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. It permitted the president to use the armed forces as necessary and appropriate to defend US national security against the continuing threat posed by Iraq, and to enforce all relevant Security Council resolutions regarding Iraq. The leading legal justification for attacking Iraq was that Saddam Hussein's regime was in breach of UN Security Council resolutions through its possession of weapons of mass destruction. As the world later learned, this justification had no basis in fact. How is the 2002 Iraq AUMF different from the 2001 AUMF? The 2001 AUMF and 2002 Iraq AUMFs were passed to authorize two very different conflicts. While the 2002 Iraq AUMF authorized force against the Saddam Hussein regime, the 2001 AUMF, passed 3 days after the attack of September 11th, authorized force against those who quote, planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons. Members of Congress intended the 2001 UMF to be tailored to target al-Qaeda, who were responsible for the 9/11 attacks, supposedly, and the Taliban, who harbored al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. However, successive administrations have used it to justify 41 operations in 19 countries by claiming that the 2001 AUMF applies to associated forces of al-Qaeda and Taliban, a term that appears nowhere in the law. Today, the 2001 AUMF is the legal basis used to justify all current wars. For this reason, it is often called the blank check for endless wars. If the 2001 AUMF covers current conflicts, how does the 2002 Iraq AUMF being used now? Since the Iraq War was declared over in 2011, the 2002 Iraq AUMF has never been cited as the sole authority for any US military operations. In 2014, the Obama administration cited the 2002 AUMF as an alternative statutory basis to the 2001 AUMF for its campaign against ISIS in Iraq, while maintaining that our position on the 2002 AUMF hasn't changed and we'd like to see it repealed. And incidentally, Biden has also said he'd like to see the 2002 AUMF repealed. The Trump administration reiterated this position, claiming in 2018 that the 2002 Iraq AUMF reinforces the authority to use force against ISIS in Iraq. But it went further, asserting that the 2002 AUMF authorizes force to address both threats to or stemming from Iraq in Syria or elsewhere. In January 2020, the Trump administration relied on this expansive interpretation to claim that the 2002 Iraq AUMF authorized its assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. This claim was rejected by respected legal scholars. Congress has responded by passing the bipartisan SJ Resolution 868 under the War Powers Resolution that directed President Trump to terminate the use of force against Iran. President Trump subsequently vetoed the resolution. This, by the way, always baffled me how the Constitution calls for the president to seek the authority of Congress to wage war, but now it's the other way around. Congress has to seek the approval of the president, and this has to change. So to fulfill Congress's constitutional responsibility is Congress's role to not only authorize, but to limit the president's power to use force. Repealing the 2002 Iraq AUMF would reassert Congress's Article 1 constitutional authority to determine if and when the United States goes to war. So that's some background, and I wanted to share with you, in addition to this, a really fascinating video of an event that took place 2 years ago at the annual gathering of FCNL. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand came to speak with us, and she's worked for many years with FCNL about repealing the AUMF. And she announced to us that she had a new landmark legislation that she was proposing called the War Powers Reform Resolution. So I wanted to share it with you because I think it's a really interesting piece of legislation, and it'll also give you a taste of what Quakers are like when we get really enthusiastic and excited.
We appreciate Senator Gillibrand's willingness to take on these tough foreign policy issues. And with this gathering,
Can hear.
Can you hear it now? Can you hear it now?
Yep.
The Advocacy Team Summit, we are thrilled you're here. And we are thrilled that Senator Gillibrand is joining us this afternoon to talk to you. I'm not sure how much a production she needs, but I will say, I think you know, she's a senator from New York. She was first elected to the House in 2007, appointed to fill Hillary Clinton's seat in the Senate in 2009. She won the 2010 special election, followed by general elections in 2012 and 2018. She's currently a member of the Senate Committees on Environment and Public Works, Armed Services, Agriculture, Nutrition, Forestry, and Aging. FCNL has worked closely with Senator Gillibrand's office on arms control, nuclear risk reduction issues, as well as the effort that you are all very familiar with, reasserting congressional authority over war.
All right.
We appreciate Senator Gillibrand's willingness to take on these tough foreign policy issues. And with this gathering of advocates who have worked so diligently for the repeal of the outdated authorizations for the use of military force, we are grateful for her leadership to ensure that Congress takes back its constitutional duty to determine whether the United States goes to war. I want to thank you for your boldness and for your staff's work with FCNL in taking on this difficult issue. Like you, we believe your willingness to work on something that will finally move us forward from the impasse of the last 18 years of war under the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs is essential. Your leadership at this moment is so important. It is what is needed to make progress and to make some real change. And finally, I just want to note and thank the Senator for her consistent and relentless, being a consistent and relentless champion for women's issues.
Yay.
This has been manifest during her time as a U.S. Senator, as well as during her tenure as a presidential candidate, and we are grateful for that. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. It is such a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm so grateful for all the work you guys have done over the years to really effectively and aggressively ask for the repeal of the 2001 and 2002 authorizations for the use of military force. You should give yourself a hand of applause. I think it is fundamentally important that we keep advocating that Congress take back its war powers authority.
That's right.
The 2001 and 2002 AUMFs were never meant to give the president a blank check for the use of military force. Never. Since they were passed, however, presidential administrations have used these authorizations to involve our military in wars far beyond their original intent. Congress has relinquished its power to declare war against new enemies or in new countries. I have served on both the House and Senate Armed Services Committee, and I now serve as the ranking member for Personnel Subcommittee on the Armed Services Committee. So I am all too familiar with the impact that the congressional inaction has had on our service members, their families, and our alliances abroad. The wars launched with these AUMFs have gone on much longer than Congress intended. Our war in Afghanistan was started 18 years ago. The war was authorized less than 3 weeks after 9/11. You could still smell the smoke smoldering in the wreckage of the towers. And our intention was the war was to be short. It was intended to be quick, a quick response to take out terrorists who attacked us on our own soil. We had the whole world on our side and a very clear mission. And our military, with our allies, got the job done. We decimated Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But then, we never left. We are still fighting in Afghanistan. We have been in this war for so long that we are now recruiting new service members who were not yet born when the war was declared. And 16 years ago, we went into Iraq based on a falsehood that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. American troops are still in Iraq today. And not only have these wars gone on for longer than intended, but presidents have since expanded them to new territories. We have sent our service members to fight in Syria. We're involved in Yemen. We have troops in over a dozen other countries without congressional debate or approval, without a clear mission, and well beyond the intent of the original AUMFs. Every year, more and more people are paying the ultimate price for these endless wars. Over 7,000 American military members have died since 2001, and so many U.S. service members have returned severely injured by wounds both seen and unseen. Since 2001, the United States and our allies have lost over 500,000 lives in these war zones. That is according to a report that was published today by the Watson Institute at Brown University. That number doesn't even include all the people who died because of a lack of access to water, to food, to medical attention caused directly by these wars. Moreover, these wars have cost nearly $6 trillion. $6 trillion. The fact of the matter is, meeting the terror threat does not require holding territory. We know that terror groups have metastasized, they recruit and plan online. They can strike us or our allies regardless of physical control of any given territory. We have the best intelligence professionals in the world, quick reaction forces, the best military assets deployed around the world. There is no geography we can't reach on short notice. We don't advance our goals by stationing tens of thousands of U.S. troops and heavy equipment in countries that don't want us there, that are very costly to supply. In fact, we do the opposite. Instead, we should be utilizing 21st century technology and strategies to address modern day threats. We should turn to our international partners first to find diplomatic solutions before turning to military force. Our presidents must stop using post 9/11 AUMFs to wage military action across the Middle East without accountability or buy-in from the American people. Yeah. Founders of our country designed our government deliberately to ensure that no branch of government held too much power. In their design, they gave Congress the power to authorize war. Congress is supposed to be the embodiment of the will of the people. We members of Congress are supposed to represent the people of our districts and of our states. We're supposed to represent the interests of Americans and our constituents. When decisions are made unilaterally by a president, Congress fails to meet their constitutionally given responsibility to hold presidents accountable for endless and unnecessary wars. It's time for Congress to reclaim their foreign policy role and accept their own constitutional responsibility. So today, I'm introducing the War Powers Reform Resolution. This legislation would end the manipulation of congressional authorizations for military force to create and extend wars Congress never agreed to. It would stop the endless wars that are now undermining our national security. It would repeal the 2001 and 2002 AUMFs that authorized the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. This would eliminate the ability of President Trump and any future president to use authorizations that are nearly 2 decades old for wars that have expanded significantly beyond the original scope of those authorizations. But simply repealing the AUMFs is not enough. We need to fundamentally change these powers for long-lasting change. We understand the consequences and costs of wars all too well. Earlier this fall, I visited the 10th Mountain Division of the U.S. Army base in Fort Drum, New York. Since 2001, the 10th Mountain Division has deployed more times than any other unit in the country. And those service members are deeply devoted to serving our country, no matter what it requires or no matter the cost. But I have heard from service members and their families about the toll that these multiple repeated deployments have taken on them. They face physical and mental health challenges because of the time away from their families. It should be the responsibility of our elected leaders to use our troops' service and dedication to this country carefully and only when needed. This is one of the many reasons military force should be used only as a last resort. If we do need to use military force, the mission must have clear and achievable goals with tactics that match the threat. And it must be done faithfully to the Constitution, with the full weight of congressional oversight and a clear explanation to the American people and our military of its purpose, goals, and targets. My legislation would require any future AUMFs passed under expedited procedures in Congress to have 5 clearly defined conditions. First, a president would be required to provide Congress with a specific objective of the military action. Second, the administration would have to provide a clear justification for Congress for the need of military force, and with clarity that the force is necessary, appropriate, and proportional to the mission. A president's justification for military force would have to be far clearer than it is now to allow the American people to better hold an administration responsible for their action. Third, an administration would be required to provide a finite list of specifically named adversaries involved in the military action, without the option to expand the scope of action unless Congress approves. Fourth, the administration would have to state in which countries or sub-regions of countries the missions would occur, preventing the use of force outside of those specified regions. Lastly, Congress would not approve any AUMF for longer than 2 years. If a president sees cause for a continuation of the military action, he or she would have to file a new AUMF with Congress. And when Congress wants to narrow or repeal an authorization, it could use the same expedited procedures used for a new AUMF, allowing Congress to make decisions not only on starting wars, but also ending wars. Critically, to enforce these requirements and uphold congressional oversight, my legislation would limit the use of congressionally appropriated funds to support only the actions authorized under the AUMF and not any actions beyond its scope. Our democracy was built to represent the will of the people. And the job of Congress is to reflect that and to protect the people. When military action is taken without the consideration of Congress, members are abdicating their responsibility to the country and putting at risk our national security and the security of the American people. It is time to reclaim Congress's full foreign policy role by changing the way the military action is authorized. Endless wars must be a thing of the past. Instead, focused and deliberate military action must be used sparingly and when we need it the most. We owe this to our service members, their families, and to all Americans.
Okay. So I wanted to share that with you to give you a little flavor of an FCNL gathering. And also to let you know that there has been some serious thought about what a replacement for the AUMF might be like that would be more consistent with the Constitution and more in the interests of American people. As a person who opposes all wars, I'd like to see no AUMFs. But if there has to be one, this is probably the best, one of the best approaches I've heard. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about this and maybe where we go next. But before we do, I want to hear from Pat. Pat, are you still with us? Pat Alviso?
I am, thank you.
Good. So I'd love to have Pat share her perspective. I think one of the things that Senator Gillibrand shared that's really important is the impact of these endless wars on the military families, and maybe you could help us get a better sense of what that's like from your perspective, Pat.
Thank you, Anthony. And I don't want to cut off the time for everybody's feedback too, so I'll be really quick. Military Families Speak Out is a national organization made up of those of us that have loved ones like me in the military since 9/11. There's other organizations similar to us like Veterans for Peace and About Face. About Face is active. It's servicemen and women who've served since 9/11 as well. But our mission is very narrowed. We support the troops, but we want them home now from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so that's what we do. We speak out across the US about the true cost of war, which is what Anthony was asking about. And it was really, it's the first time I've heard Gillibrand talk about this act. So I was really heartened to hear her talk about multiple deployments, because that is what's breaking our families right now. It's very personal, the AUMF, to us. You know, we lived in fear what they were going to use this legislation for, and it's just gotten worse than we ever imagined. None of us ever thought we would see our children, and some of our, like in the case of Nadia McCaffrey here in Long Beach, her grandson joined and her son was killed. It's just a nightmare for us that keeps coming back over and over again, and our families can't begin to heal until we can finally get them home. You know, we have long held the feeling that terrorism is not a definable group of people. It's a tactic in war. And so when they use this loose term to chase people, it's very emotional, and particularly to our military families, because we're kind of stuck in that space where we don't want these wars anymore, but yet we have to support our loved ones who are doing this work. And so you see a lot of conflict in our family. You see a lot of people just broken and worn down, not just from fear of our families being deployed over and over again, not knowing what's going to happen when they're over there and when they come home, but that fear that we have that we're going to lose our families as well if we speak out. So those are the things that we're up against. So when you hear, especially, you know, some of our Gold Star family members and some of our families who've suffered from these wars over and over again, they are being very brave. And we offer to you are people that actually would like to speak out and have more opportunities to say what they're going through. Each person is different. And if you would like to hear from any of our families to address some of the things that they've gone through to your organizations, we will be happy to do that. We also speak out in schools and work with our legislators, of course, to try to end this war. And currently, some of the things we're working on is trying to get a second meeting with the White House. We had our first, and we're trying now to try to get our second one, because we're very anxious about this peace treaty. We know they're not going to observe it by May 1st and get all of our troops out of Afghanistan, but we're still going to push for that and getting them out, if not May 1st, as soon as possible. We also do other work like supporting our deported veterans. It's a triple shame, that our veterans have been betrayed by this government after they've served, many of them with honor, and then they get deported. So they're getting punished 3 times over. We're supporting some of the whistleblowers like Reality Winner, who try to expose some of the things that are going on. If you didn't know about her, she's one of our military families. She's serving time in prison. She's speaking out about how our voting was, how the Russians had broken into our voting system. And we also are working hard to oppose the privatization of the VA. So this is just some of the things that we are working on now, and really want to work hard and heavy on eliminating the AUMF altogether, want to end to. So thank you very much, and look forward to hearing from you. I will leave my contact on the chat. And thank you for your nice support. It's so great to see all of you. I've seen some of you over the years, but to know that all of you are feeling the same thing that we are, and helping getting the word out about stopping the AUMF, it's just wonderful to have you there doing your work. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pat, so much. I mean, you're doing amazing work, and certainly we would love to have you and other families come and speak to us in more depth later on. So we'll definitely try to schedule you at a future date. Anybody else have any comments about what was shared today?
Well, Anthony, thank you so much. And if those who would like to say something will press the raise your hand icon. I do see Steve Rohde has his hand up.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Anthony. I'm going to use this opportunity to thank you for your superb organizing around these visits. The visit, I'm not sure we reported back on the visit with Senator Padilla's national security aide. You may want to weave that into the rest of your remarks, because it was extremely successful, as well as those letters to the editor you may want to mention. My question right now, in our planning sessions, Anthony, we've limited ourselves to the 2002 AUMF resolution. And the more I heard Senator Gillibrand refer to both the 2001 and the 2002 AUMF, and even the slides you showed, I'm personally unsure of why we're limiting our ask to the 2002 AUMF.
I think that's a really good question. And I think, what it boils down to is what's possible right now is to get this piece of legislation approved. But it's just a first step, because there's going to be some talk about replacing the 2002 AUMF with something more specific. But the reason I shared Senator Gillibrand's talk was she really is looking at the big picture. What can we do to ensure that future AUMFs will be what they should be, very limited, and hold the president accountable and all of that. So I think this is just a first step, but I think it would be good to mention that precisely that we need to reform the War Powers Act. We need to have an understanding of what an AUMF should be, and that it should be very limited and rare.
I think we're experiencing in so many areas, certainly a group like ours needs to make the highest demands on these issues.
Right.
We should not compromise in the front end when we are lobbying for something just because others in the political system may compromise later on. If we don't ask for the repeal of both of these, as Gillibrand did, you know, it's going to be compromised farther to the war-making side of the spectrum. So I do agree with you that I think we are allowed to make our highest and best demand to hold our congressional leaders accountable.
Thank you, Steve. I see one other hand up, and that is myself. And the question I have for Anthony and those working on some sort of a agreement with our foes to end this thing is how do we, in any good conscience, justify carrying on talks when half the population is excluded? There are no women involved at all, and yet they have suffered the most. Education has been denied to their girls. They've been raped. They've been forced into forced marriages. How could we possibly justify proceeding any kind of peace talk when half the population is left out, just as much as they were left out in the governor's office in Georgia when the voter suppression laws were signed?
So your question is what role would we play to ensure that the women of Afghanistan are heard?
They
What
have equal voice.
Well, yes, but how do we ensure that, John?
That's what I'm asking you.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've been there for 17 years, and one of the reasons that we use to justify being there is that we're concerned about human rights and the rights of women. If after 17 years they still don't have any rights, we have not succeeded. So is there any reason to think that staying there longer would help the women of Afghanistan?
Well, they're in school now. They
Well,
weren't before.
Okay.
There is some degree of security. They don't get acid thrown in their faces.
Well, okay.
It's like Colin Powell said, you get into it and it's pottery barn rules. You break it, you own it.
So you're thinking that we should stay there then and continue the work that we're doing?
No, we need to find a responsible way out that involves all the people, not just a bunch of piggy men.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, any other? I don't really have a
I
solution.
see
to the problem
some
with
other
Afghanistan.
hands here. Stephen, I'm going to call on you, and I hope you'll be prepared to send us out in our closing circle. All right.
Liberated. It seems to me that to repeal the authorization of the use of military force, we also must repeal the mindset that foments and supports war making. And I know that there has been a movement to establish a cabinet level Ministry of Peace, because the idea of understanding peace is something that we just, as a human race, have not been able to grasp, despite the teachings of so many of our wonderful prophets and religious leaders and philosophers and writers. So does the repeal of the authority of military force, use of military force, also engage with the cabinet level ministry, establishment of Ministry of Peace. We have Ministry of War, but where's the Ministry of Peace?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. And I know that the Friends Committee on National Legislation is also trying to look at the big picture. They have a study out that called Prioritizing Peace. And we had someone from FCNL come and share with us about that. So it isn't just a matter of being anti-war or repealing this bill or that authorization, but really looking at the picture of how do we use diplomacy and soft power and moral suasion to have an influence in the world instead of relying so heavily on the military. So I totally agree with you. We need to look at that bigger picture.
Well, this is, I think it's kind of, it's okay. It's not disingenuous for a group that says we must stop blessing war and violence to be for revocation of this of these authorizations that actually broaden the authority to do it. But it's worrisome to me to put a lot of energy into it. All these limitations get washed away at a time of media panic, public panic, and propaganda from the governments and the militaries. And that's a big, big danger, no matter how the limitations are written. The constitutional ones we know got thrown out, and the AUMF is a sort of a replacement constitution, and that's not abided by either. So while it's fine to get this stuff written as narrowly as possible, we really need, I'm remembering Steve Rohde's remark a couple of minutes ago, how do we articulate and work for the position that our organizational declaration says, and that Anthony says, against war unconditionally, and where, who is going to be articulating that and putting the energy into it that's being put into this this kind of narrowing thing. And it's well and good to say, well, you got to narrow it first before you stop it completely, but somebody's got to be talking about the full position. And how do we do that? And how does that fit in with this? Anything Anthony or others would have to say about it?
Well, I think
I'd like to hear.
Yeah, I think you've hit on, this very dilemma that we Quakers have. We are essentially a pacifist religion, and we have a lobby in Congress to advocate for that viewpoint. And it's well known that we are where we stand, just like ICUJP. We're opposed to all wars, but we also recognize that sometimes we need an incremental approach. Quakers abolished slavery amongst themselves in the 18th century, and they didn't do it overnight. It took 40 years of step-by-step limiting how the Quakers could hold slaves until finally in 1774, they said you couldn't hold slaves and be a Quaker. And then that expanded to becoming abolitionists. Many Quakers became abolitionists in the 19th century. So I think the Quaker approach has been to have an absolutist stand, but to implement it incrementally. And I think with ICJP, we can do what we want, but I hope that we are pragmatic, and also we held to our mission, which is to end war. That's our goal. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind. And I'm glad that Steve brought it up, and I'm glad that you bring it up, because we need to change the mindset as well as the laws.
One of my questions is what is happening with the War Powers Reform Resolution from Gillibrand? And the other statement I wanted to make is, yes, we're all concerned, of course, about women and what's happening with them. Of course, that's sort of a pinkwashing thing for any of us to believe at this point that we went in there to actually help women. I mean, and the overall thing that concerns us, of course, is the fact that when you think about all the civilians that have been killed, and I think it's more than 500,000, Mostly they are women and children. And whenever we have drone warfare and these families are killed, these people are not reading the newspaper. They're not keeping up with the news. They just know that the US has killed many of their families. And again, with mostly women and children, there's no reason for us to be there that's helping women or children for any reason, not to mention all the resources we've taken away from them when they become refugees. I'm done, but could you talk about what's going on with the war powers
Yes,
reform resolution?
I frankly don't know where that stands right now. So that's a good question. I think it needs to be examined, but you know, that I brought it up because I'm hoping that once this AUMF is repealed, that the next step will be taken and they'll be talking about what kind of replacement to put into place. And I hope that Senator Gillibrand's proposal is taken seriously because I think it's a good one. Not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction.
I'm also a member of, I used to be a member of Veterans for Peace because I'm also a veteran during the Vietnam era. And so, you know, I was working on many of these veterans issues during, you know, during the, at least 10 years ago and so forth, you know. I mean, we have to call it the way it is. You know, I think the U.S. government, you know, first we need to unite and support to repeal many of these unauthorized declaration of war. And so we need to unite, you know. We don't have much choice but to unite. But at the same time, we need to call the government that these are a criminal act by the U.S. government. You know, look what happened in Iraq. You know, 1.2 million killed by the United States. This is a lot of lives that are being wasted. You know, and the justice for veterans in Vietnam, there's still no justice. So we don't have no choice but to coalesce with each other and fight for many of these injustices that's happening. We have a lot of veterans that, you know, during the Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth, you know, we have to at least really coalesce with each other. And I forgot what's my question, but you know, we need to support each other. We don't have much choice. I guess that's all I can say about these things.
Thank you.
Fernando, thank you for sharing that. And I want to respond by saying that, you know, Steve gave me some credit for the last meeting we had at Padilla's office, but actually I was just blown away by the fact that Veterans for Peace and Military Families Speak Out and U.S. deported vets, members of those organizations showed up. And I don't know how they got the word, but I guess we have a great system here with ICUJP of getting the word out. And when they showed up and they shared their stories at the office of Senator Padilla, it was very effective. I mean, it was very powerful because they spoke from their own experience with war and its impact. So I think it's so important in the peace movement that we work with veterans and we work with the families of veterans because we share a common goal. And I think it just adds to our effectiveness. So I'm really glad that that they got on board for this visit and the one today. So, yep, that's my view. I'm really grateful for this coalition that we're building.
Thank you. I just wondered if you saw anybody from my group, Vietnam Veterans Against the War. We were also against the Spanish-American War too.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I agree with what many people have said, you know, about including, you know, your work, Anthony, with the Friends Lobby and Steve Rodian and particularly Stephen Fisk too, about, yeah, we got to stop the legislation or, you know, narrow it down, get rid of it, whatever, because that's part of how the cover that people are using in Congress to do some of the horrid things we're doing around the world. And, you know, it doesn't mean they won't come up with a new one, but, you know, it does put some light on it. You know, that's very biblical, right? Like we when we put the light on things, you know, it kind of drives back some of the bad things, and it makes it harder for people to be bad actors when there's light's shining on them. But I also wanted to say what I wanted to respond to with what echoing what Stephen Fisk was saying about, you know, a Department of peace building, I think some people are calling it. You know, they do have this in some places, and where our friend Grace here, she would remind us about Costa Rica, right? That has a Department of Peace and not a Department of War, and that got rid of their kind of whole kind of war machinery for them, and how much more of their economy they have. Now, I saw Emma posted that link about, you know, why we love war. And yes, I think in our country, in many ways we do. But I kind of think also part of it is not just that we love war, but that we don't want to disrespect our veterans, which I think is why Fernando and Ed Fisher and John Forney, why those are so important, because I think that's also part of the fear and or cover that people use. Oh, you're disrespecting people's sacrifice. You're disrespecting our service people. And, you know, if we can have people stand with us and say, no, it's not disrespecting, it's respecting, number one. And number two, I wanted to say, besides the Department of Peace, you know, to help us, you know, with some of this cabinet level thing, we need funding, right? Like we do our peace education with ICJP and SOLA, Community Peace Center, with kids, but there's not many people funding that, honestly. You know, we try to sneak it in under, you know, education or you know, at-risk youth programs or leadership programs or whatever. But, you know, if we had a Department of Peace, maybe they would help just draw down some of that military funding to help raise up a generation of kids who think peace is possible and that we don't have to be in endless war, and kind of grow up steeped in that. Now, in Sola Community Peace Center, I don't think we're 100% effective, that everybody's totally against war when they're finished, but I think we conscientize people, and they grow up with a different set of consciousness than the mainstream. And if we don't do that, what we're clearly aware of is that they're going to be just steeped in the, you know, war is unavoidable. War is just a natural part of human you know, relations on this earth. So, Anthony, yes, for all the work you're doing, and yes, for more, and yes, please, for a Department of Peace, and yes, please, for some funding and some conscientization of generations of kids so that we can really grow a culture of peace.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing. I think teaching peace is so critically important. And I often say that, you know, in the 19th century, war colleges were started and war became a science. And in the 20th century, that science proved to be deadly effective in killing people in mass. But what we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years has been the growth of peace studies, both at the you know, the elementary and high school level, but also at this college and graduate school level. So we have people who've been trained in peace studies, and they should be put to work in the government to do exactly what needs to be done. The person we met with at Padilla's office went to the War College. That was his training. We need people who go to graduate from peace studies to be influential in our government. So I'm totally with you on that.
All right. Thank you. Steve, you're next.
I'm going to step back. I spoke once. Michael Novik put up his hand, then I'll go after that.
Okay, Michael, and then Steve.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I was going to talk about something else, but because you mentioned the War College, I wanted to point out that there was a guy who was the interim chief of police here in LA, who also was a graduate of the U.S. Army War College, and that war is, you know, a phenomenon inside the society. as well as around the world. I guess what I wanted to talk about is the whole thing about supporting our troops. There's this story about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln served one term in Congress before he was president, and that was when the U.S. went to war with Mexico. And the president acted without authorization to claiming that the U.S. had been attacked by Mexico because he moved troops into a contested area of Texas after the annexation of Texas. And Lincoln actually voted against the declaration of war that I think it was Tyler sought. But then once the war started, he voted for the appropriation to finance it on the basis that he wanted to support the troops. And I think supporting our troops is just a trick bag. I think we really have to avoid that whole, the way to support our troops is to get them out of all the military bases around the world, bring them home, put them to work, building roads or electrification or digitization or something, if you want to have them in the military at all. That's all.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. I totally agree. I think one of the things that we've learned from the Vietnam War, though, is to have the best possible relationship we can with veterans and with military, especially those who are sharing our values. And so I think we've learned that we need to stand in solidarity, especially with groups like Veterans for Peace and military families and so forth. They're our best allies. When we work together, we can be much more effective. That's how we support our troops.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Steve, you're on.
Well, I so appreciate Joe Majlis's comments generally, but I was a little confused by his remarks today. We've said a lot that perfect is the enemy of good. Are you saying, Joe, that the kind of work that FCNL and we're doing in lobbying to repeal these AUMFs and to have the War Powers Reform Resolution passed, are you just despairing over those efforts because they're not enough?
Well, I don't know if I should speak now because if there are other people that want to, but I could answer Steve's questions. What's the chair's opinion about it?
I don't see any other hand up. Joe, you're on.
Okay, great. No, I'm not despairing. What's missing is the articulation of the fuller position that Michael just gave and some others have referred to. That is, we can get occupied with trying to narrow something that we would oppose even in its use, even in its narrow form. Okay, I don't think that's disingenuous, but what's missing? What's missing is the burden of our work ought to be articulating that further position so that the incremental steps that may be adopted by the wider society and the existing system will have a target, a direction, a place to go that's really clear and that occupies more and more space in the culture. So it's what's missing and where our the apportionment of our energies that concerns me, Steve. It's not to say the other things are worthless. Of course, there's value in them, but I'm missing the push and the articulation of the fuller position. That's the way I was meaning it. I hope that helps or answers your question.
Well, we have a few minutes. What would the Majlis plan look like?
Oh, it would look like articulating our statement against war and empire and talking about the obligations of the U.S. to do the repair that was just mentioned. Fernando, I think, mentioned some of that, fixing things up. Others mentioned, and to put the more of our efforts into articulating those stands about how destructive to our society the wars are. Many of the things that our guest today mentioned, but to talk about them also, how do we take steps to prevent all of these limitations from being swept away as they were after 9/11. The Constitution and the AUMFs in whatever format are very subject to being washed away by civic panic. I remember a couple of days after 9/11, I went to the Red Cross headquarters in LA because I'm a disaster mental health person. They wanted some people there to support those who were answering phone calls from people. And there were 4 TVs up on the wall in the room where there are all these phone calls and people receiving calls to give advice to folks, to help them try to find relatives in New York and other places. And every network had running across the bottom of its screen some words, maybe some of you remember, America's New War, or some similar phrase like that. No legal limitations will stand against that kind of pressure. So that's the big concern of mine, and I don't have an answer except if even a small couple of % of the population were better able to stand up against the panic inducement, we'd be so much better off. But how do we get there and how do we work towards that? I don't know. That's where I'd like to see more of our intentions, our inventiveness, our creativity going in that direction, but not to neglect some of these specific limits that Anthony has presented to us today. And even Gillibrand, who seems to be able to use the word we only when she's talking about the USA, never about the world itself. That's it's an apportionment of energies is what I'm talking about. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Joe.
And
And
thanks for the
wanted to-
challenge. Thanks for the challenge
Yeah,
for me
I
to
wanted to
articulate
share
it better. That's always good.
Thank you. I wanted to share with everyone the vision for FCNL. This is what really is our mission statement. We seek a world. Oops, let me get this. We seek a world free of war and the threat of war. We seek a society with equity and justice for all. We seek a community where every person's potential may be fulfilled. We seek an earth restored. So our vision is for environmental restoration, for social justice, and for an end to war. That's our big picture. And I think that's what we share with ICUJP. And we have a similar set of values that are part of our mission. So, you know, that's what we strive for. That's what we seek. But in our day-to-day work, we try to make a difference where we can. And this is one instance where we can make a difference.